evening, everybody. I've been asked to talk about this topic about talent development in badminton clubs. And as you may know, I'm working as a talent development manager in the Danish Federation. And I've had the pleasure of having some Irish visitors in the last couple of weeks, which was very pleasant and nice to meet you all. I hope they got some very good information back home. Tonight I'll try to give you some insights in my thoughts about what a good talent development club is, and what some areas to focus on. And then it's up to you guys to apply it to your own club, because obviously I don't have a lot of knowledge of how things are working in Irish badminton clubs. That also means that I might say some things that are not really relevant or which are hard to use in your club, but then you have to try to do the interpretation yourselves, or to select a little bit in what is relevant and what is not. I hope I can inspire you all to do something a little bit different from tomorrow and onwards in your own clubs. My background is I've worked in badminton all my life. I started as a coach when I was 12 years old in my first club, where I was an assistant coach for some of the juniors, and then I spent a lot of years becoming a better coach, and ended up being the national coach for Denmark for over 10 years. And after that, I've worked in the federation for the grassroots players, like the leisure players, everyone who was not elite players, been in charge of that department, and now I'm in charge of the talent department. So I've been pretty much everywhere, or working with all types of badminton players in Denmark. I've also been abroad, working in Norway, in New Zealand, and among other, Holland, also the Netherlands, among other places. Yeah, that was a brief introduction. Denmark is known normally as a powerhouse of badminton, and we are working very hard to try to keep our position as one of the world leading nations in badminton. But the competition is increasing. In the 90s, when I started working with elite badminton, there were only 5 countries in the world who could win medals at the World Championships. When there was World Championships in Denmark in 23, there were 9 countries who medaled. So it's and especially becoming an Olympic sport has changed badminton more or less. A lot of countries are investing a lot in trying to make world-class players, which is very good for us. But we try to maintain our position as one of the world-leading nations in producing world-class badminton players. And why is that important in connection with talking about children in an Irish club? I think for us in Denmark, it's important that is our vision. That is what we are striving for. We are trying to beat the neighbor club and the players from there, but we are all together trying to produce some players who can achieve the podium in the biggest tournaments in the world. And as much as we are fighting each other, we are working together in trying to bring forward these talented players. And how can we do that with so small numbers? We are only 6 million people in Denmark. About 100,000 of them are playing badminton, and very few of them are talents. But that's, in my opinion, it's because of the history. We have done it for a long time. So you know that if you are one of the best players in Denmark, then probably you're also close to top 10 in the world. We also have gained a lot of knowledge. We have well-educated coaches. I think we have the best coaching education, at least in Europe, maybe in the world, but I don't know a lot about the coaching education in Asia. So yeah, I can't conclude that, but I know that we are leading in that area, at least in Europe, which is also important. And a lot of coaches, a lot of well-educated coaches and experienced coaches is very important in a system like ours. And we are actually lacking coaches, so we have to educate even more than we are doing today. So that's one of the points that we are really working hard on. And then it becomes more and more relevant, maybe. Then we have a lot of strong badminton clubs with well-educated coaches, with good facilities, with a lot of courts where the kids can play and develop and have a lot of their, or most of their social life in their spare time outside school. We as a federation are not doing very much for the players. Most of their training, most of their life actually is in the clubs. So that's why the clubs are key in bringing forward talented players. And then the last thing is that we have a centralized elite system which is accepted by everyone. And that means we have the national team training in Brøndby, where we have around 35 players who are training together every day, and everybody supports this system. Very few have grown out of the system, out of the top. That's a little bit different, but all the juniors, all the talents, they dream about going to the national team training in Brøndby. And that is very good. Not so many years ago, I know that England tried to decentralize, to send all their singles players back home and practice with their own coaches, which there could be advantages in doing, but badminton is a sparring sport, and you need quality on the other side of on the other half of the court, the other side of the net, in order to improve. So we still believe in, and everybody in Denmark believes in, that the best thing is to bring together all the best players and make them practice as much as possible with each other. Also in history, that we have a lot of good facilities. Every time we have a small town or village of 3,000 people, there will be a sports hall, and in that sports hall there will always be 5 badminton courts. And normally there would also be a well-functioning badminton club. So that means no matter where you're born in Denmark, then you will get exposed to badminton. When I was working as a coach in Norway, for the juniors, we spent a lot of the time teaching them the rules. That's not necessary in Denmark because everybody knows the rules, all the parents knows the rules. It's on the television all the time, so it's easy to get access to good badminton. Yeah, so that's the background for who we are in Denmark and how we are achieving the results we are at the moment. Then we're going to talk about talent development clubs, as I call them. And what is a talent development club? That is a club that develops some talents. It's not a club full of talent. It's some of the players, a few of the players who has the potential to reach world class. That's how we define a talent. And another thing is that we look at in Denmark, we are trying to look at the potential. So we want the players to become as good as they can when they are grown-ups. So we have to make them play until they are 25, 30 in order to see whether they can reach world class or not. Now we're going to European Juniors under 19 now next week, and a lot of people are asking me, what are your goals? What do we have to achieve there? And I said, but we have to gain a lot of experiences. We are trying to win as much as we can. We are more happy if we medal than if we don't. But the most important thing is that the players they they get some experiences, they learn how to play a tournament that's important for them, and we see it as a training camp basically. So if they are not in the tournament anymore, then they're obliged to practice on and to try to find some of the other players who are not in the tournament anymore and play or either train or play matches with them in the last days until we go home. So that's the goal, to produce players with world-class potential. And then I have 4 areas I'm going to go through tonight, and which I think are very important for a talent development club. One headline is sustainable recruitment. We need to get some players in order to see who can hit the shuttle, basically. Then we need sustainable funding. Without funding, it's impossible to run a well-functioning badminton club. It takes some money. Then quality is key. It's some of the phrases or the words I say the most in my job is quality and long-term potential. That's what we're talking about all the time. And then the environment of the club is also very important, which I will also get back to. Yes. One of the things that I think can be improved in Danish clubs is the sustainable recruitment. After COVID, all the clubs had lost some players, and maybe they hadn't lost them, but it was they were not able to get some players starting because the halls were closed here, so we couldn't practice. So almost all the clubs, they made an effort in trying to get new members. But then the year after, that was successful, then maybe the club was full or whatever, or you weren't as focused on it the year after. And then they didn't do the same thing. And that's a problem, I think, because then you will get very large groups of players in one age and maybe some narrow groups underneath. And what you need as a talent development club is a consistent flow of players into the club. For recruiting the players, you need to have a strategy, and you need to do, if it works, the strategy, then you need to do the same thing every year. And that could be working together with the nearby schools. For instance, we do that a lot with the young kids, invite the schools to come and try badminton, or making open hall days, or different things, how you expose the kids for badminton and invite new members in to test it out. It's not so much how you do it, it's more that you do it and that you do it continuously every year, so that we get an inflow of players every year and at every age. Then we have for the beginners, and that's where this picture is from, we have this concept called Miniton, which is for players from 5 to 8 years old, beginners, where it's almost not badminton. It's like a lot of basic skills, a lot of games, playing different things, trying to get introduced to badminton, and that's a very good start for the players, a fun way to start, and it will then maybe after a year, it depends, some are there half a year after season, some of them for more than a season. It depends on also how old they are when they start, and also how they progress. But then they will, from that, they will move on to more normal training, normal group training, where it's a little bit more focused on what we would call proper badminton. There are still lots of games, lots of basic movement skills, also with balls and other stuff, like so not shuttles all the time. but there will be more badminton instruction in the normal trainings. Then one big thing, as I also mentioned in the introduction, is coaches, the education of coaches, and also the number of coaches. In Denmark, it's like we don't have a coaching academy that educates coaches outside the clubs. So all the clubs or all the coaches, they come through the clubs. I imagine it would be the same in your case. And if that is true, and it is, then I can only mention maybe 2 or 3 clubs who are educating more coaches than they need themselves. And if those 2 things are true, then we will always have too few coaches. Does that make sense? So all the coaches are coming from the clubs, and hardly any clubs are educating more coaches than they need themselves. Then there's always a lack of coaches in our system. And that's one of the things that we are trying to talk to the clubs about, that and especially the big clubs, that they have to have focus on this, because the bigger clubs, coaches have ambition as well as players, so they're moving to the bigger clubs. The bigger clubs are normally in the bigger cities, so always the coaches are coming to study or whatever. So some of the bigger clubs in the bigger cities, they are a little bit spoiled because they get coaches coming from outside, but still they have to produce a lot of coaches that maybe have to go in the beginning to the smaller clubs in the surroundings to get a job. So in the future, I hope that we will have much more coaches, and a club should all the time be looking at how can we produce more coaches and encourage them, because everybody loses coaches. That happens. So we have to make sure that we also have new coaches starting. And then you also have to recruit leaders, volunteers in the club, somebody to sit in the boards, somebody to do different jobs, run the tournaments, arrange a party, or whatever it takes. Be in charge of the teams for team matches, or whatever task you need help for. And in Denmark, it has been a tradition that it's very few people, it's a few persons, and they are working very, very hard. They almost have an extra job in the club outside their normal job. We don't have that many of those people anymore who wants to do that. So it's very important that instead of doing everything themselves in the board, they should delegate the responsibility, they should delegate the tasks. And then there are lots of, especially parents, who are willing to give a hand and to work for the club. The parents in Denmark today, they are a little bit afraid of taking a place in or seat in the board, because they don't know how much time that would take, but they are more interested in their kids' leisure activity than my parents were. My parents have never seen me practice badminton. And when we have a children's practice in the club today, there would be 5 or 6 parents watching or working on their laptops. They would be there. And if they're there with the laptop, then they might be able to do an invitation for a party or a tournament or whatever. But it's very important that the board members, the leaders, they are leading, they are trying to delegate the tasks instead of doing the tasks and getting very busy from doing everything themselves. Involve the parents and the other volunteers if there are any. Yeah, and if you can divide the tasks into smaller things, and say, could you make this invitation? Could you go with the players for this tournament, or could you arrange this camp? So the coaches can focus on coaching it. That's a task that it's easy to say yes to because you know how much you have to work. Whereas if you say, can you be in charge of the junior board for the next 8 years, then you don't know how much you are saying yes to. Um, and then, and this relates to the coaching part, but also to the volunteers. It would be a good idea if all clubs have an HR responsible. And that could be a person who are looking for, and you could have more than one. You could have one looking for volunteers and leaders, and you could have one looking for coaches, potential coaches. So the task of these persons are to find the talents in coaching, the talents in leading, in volunteering, so that you try to invite new people in instead of just keep doing the same with the same people. I hope this makes sense to you. Otherwise, you're welcome to ask. Yeah. But give the responsibility to someone so they are looking for these persons. Because the well-run clubs, they are run by a lot of people, not only a few. Then there's the funding part, and it's a little bit the same as on the previous slide, that you need sustainable funding. You need to be sure that there are money for next year as well. So have a plan for the funding. Also have a plan for, are we trying to increase the funding? Are we trying to grow? Or are we happy with the way things are? Do we just want the same budget for next year? Because then you can make the other choices according to that in the club. And it's very important to have continuity also in the funding in the economy, because this is one of the things that can really break down a club if they lose the funding, or if you are not sure about the funding for next year. Then also your coaches will become insecure if they don't know whether they will have a job next year or a salary. So this is, you could say, basic, but it's very important. And when you have clubs that are short of funding, then it almost takes all the focus in the club, and you can't focus on doing other good things. So it's very important to have the control of the basics. And it's also very important here to find the right persons. So have some volunteers, have some leaders who are working with money in their their profession. And that's also the same for the HR persons I was recommending on the previous slide, that if you can find someone who are working with this in normally in their normal job, then it's much easier for them to do this. If you take somebody who is very good in the HR part, and then ask them to do the money thing or to raise some more money, then it will take a lot of energy from them, and they're probably not very good at it. So try to get the right persons into the right tasks, because then there's a much bigger chance of success, and it's easier for them, and then that way it will probably work out more smoothly. The third area is maybe the biggest area, and that the headline for that is quality. And of course, we have to have quality. But here I'm going to talk about quality in training. That's very important. And what does that mean? Does that mean that we have to be very serious and professional all the time? And no, it doesn't. It means that the kids, they should have fun when they are there. There should be a high level of activity. We should teach them to learn, and that could be both like formal learning, a coach showing a shot or some technique, and sorry, I lost you. I hope I'm back. Formal learning where a coach is showing a technique and an exercise, and then they have to go and do it. But also a lot of informal learning where we're doing some small games, where we are pretending to do something else, and then we are actually we can see that the kids are learning how to move. We're talking a lot about that the kids should move like different animals or whatever, and then it's actually footwork they're doing, but they don't know it. They think we're playing a game of walking around in the zoo or whatever. And the good thing about kids is that their imagination is very well developed, and if you can get them into a play mode, a game mode, then they can focus for a very long time. If you are doing a lot of formal training and like old type of school teacher, then they can't focus for very long. So the mix is very important, and the playing bit is, in my experience, also very important. And you can make them be very involved and focus for a very long time if you hit them the right way on the right day. And also, if they are bored or they don't get the idea of the exercise we're doing or the activity we're doing, then you can try and explain it one more time, or but it's I haven't seen a lot of kids who are improving if they have giving in terms of the activity, or they don't get the idea. So telling them you have to continue if they don't get the idea is oftentimes a waste of time. So then try to explain it in a different way, or give them another task to try to get them back in focus. And focus can be doing the activity and laughing out loud, and it's not like it has to be very serious and focused in the normal term. Then you have to have quality in the training volume. You have to have enough space, enough courts, enough training for them during the week, but you also have to not overdoing it. We recommend that you no matter how old you are, you have at least one day a week where you're not training. When you are young, under 13, then you have to have more. And also instead of having a lot of arranged training with coaches, then there should be some arranged trainings with coaches, but then also you could have some free play time where the hall is open, and the kids, they can come and practice if they want, and they can do what they want. And we like that. We like the initiative, and we also like that you can. Kids are very good at feeling, should I do more or shouldn't I do more? Am I hungry for more games today, or whatever? So they will control it themselves. Yeah. So when I was working for Badminton New Zealand, I went to a club and I was trying to give them feedback on their high performance setup, and the club was training once a week. They had two teams. They were training every Thursday in two training groups, and I said, yeah, but if you buy the hall or hire the hall one more day a week, they will improve. So it's you cannot make very good badminton players with training once a week, but they should also not train 10 times a week. And then it's also very important with the sparring partners. I was talking about that in terms of the national team in Denmark. It goes all the way down that it's very good to have sparring, to have people who can play badminton on the other side of the net. And the players are learning a lot from the coaches, but they are learning at least as much from their peers, from their other players in the club. Also, if there are good players, adult players in the club, then it's a very good idea to make the kids watch them play, because they will learn a lot from that and taking that in. We have this general rule that you should play 25% against somebody who is weaker than you. You should play around 50% against someone your own level, and you should play 25% against someone above your level. Nowadays, we have a problem in Denmark that a lot of the best players, they think that they can only play against people who are better than themselves. And then we ask them, but what do you think Victor Axelsen is doing? Who should he practice with? Because he's at least sometimes of the year he's the best in the world. So you have to be able to get the best out of the situation you have. But when you arrange the training week in the club, then see if you can meet these requirements as good as possible. Because the good thing about playing against someone weaker than you is that you have more time. You can experiment a little bit with your shots, with your technique, but you also sometimes have to take a little bit more responsibility for the exercise, for the quality of the practice. Of course, it's good to practice a lot with the same level as yourself, because then you get challenged at your own level, and then sometimes you have to try to be pushed a little bit, to play a little bit faster, to try to return better quality shots from the opponent. So that's why it's also good to play against stronger players. Yeah. And then I'm going to talk about the environment, and it's very good, or it's almost necessary that the club has a strategy. It's not all clubs in Denmark that are talent development clubs. Some clubs are leisure clubs. Some clubs are elite clubs without talent development. We have some clubs who are or that are playing to win the Danish league championships, the team championships, but they don't bring up any talents. They don't have a youth department with a lot of strong young players. So it's very important that the club decides what kind of club are we, and then takes the decision, or makes the decisions based on the strategy. And it can be difficult to agree on the strategy, because there are probably different departments of the club. There are some leisure players who have played at the same. They've played Monday night 7 o'clock for the last 30 years, and if the club comes and says now we have to have some juniors training here, then they will get upset. But then try to see if they could try to play Tuesday, or they could try to play 8 o'clock, and see if that works out. But it is very important to be clear on the strategy in order to make the decisions, also the hard ones. Then it's very important to have values of the club and also to nurture the values. One thing is to have values on the board saying that we are doing this and that, we want to be this kind of club. But you also have to make sure that the coaches, the best players, they are role models, that they are actually also living by the values of the club. One of the things that have started in Denmark is that back in the day when I was young, a junior player, we always took a shower after training. Yeah, not all the kids together, but boys and girls together, or separately. But we also had some social time in the dressing room after the practice. After COVID, where they were not allowed to shower in the hall, that has disappeared more or less. After training, the players, they are not staying. They just go back home straight after training. And we think we're losing a lot of good environment there. And also there are good things about being in a dressing room together as well. So some of the clubs have actually said, we are a club where you take a shower after your practice. And also before, it was done after physical education classes in the school. That has also vanished a little bit. So the club is a place where you are also being brought up as a young person, and you are taught how to behave and how to treat others, not only how to play badminton. Yeah, the good habits show up well in time before practice. Try just to give it a little bit of thought what you are going to do. Also, we try to encourage the parents not to pack the badminton bags. And that means that some of the kids, they show up without shoes, they show up without shorts, and then they have to practice with whatever they've got, or in whatever they've got, and then they might remember it next time. But that's also one of the things that we actually believe in Denmark, is that we have independent players, we have players who can take care of themselves. So then if we want that, we also have to bring them up like that, and to raise them to take charge of their own life. Of course, this increases with age. We don't expect the same things, the same maturity from a 7-year-old as we do from a 17-year-old. And then we actually have alternative activities other than badminton. And I think that's a very good thing, because in sports clubs, the hierarchy are defined a lot according to how good you are at the sport. So the core persons in a junior group will oftentimes be the best badminton players. But if you do other activities, you also show that the not so good badminton players, they are good at other things, and you put them into a different environment, and that's good learning for all the kids. And you might have wondered why this picture of a lovely bay in Spain is in this slide, but that's actually because this bay was close to the hotel where we stayed when there was World Junior Championships under 19 in Spain, in Santander. And we spent half a day walking to this beach. Those who wanted to go for a swim, they did that. But that's just an example of a different activity. It had nothing to do with badminton. It had just something to do with experiencing where we were and being together. Also showing teenagers that you can walk 2 kilometers without dying. They can run a lot, but they are not used to walking. Yeah, that was just one example of a different activity that was not badminton focused, but something we did, and which was a good activity for the group. And I also find it's very good when we travel, and that could be overseas, but it could also be in our own country, just to get a little bit of cultural activity, cultural knowledge about where we are. So try to see something other than the sports hall as well. Yeah, that was the 4 areas I have picked as the most important ones for a talent development badminton club. I hope you can relate to it in your own club. And now you will get a little bit of time just to reflect a little bit on how does these 4 headlines how do they match your own club? What is it you want to bring back to the club, and maybe suggest could we focus a little bit more on this, or also what are we doing really well? Because that's also very good to a very good reflection that if there's some area where you are very strong already, then don't forget it, keep doing it. But maybe also that means that you can focus on something else. I don't know, Tom, should we combine it with a little bit of a break and then continue?
Lars, yeah, I agree. I think that's a great idea. Thank you for that. That was a very quick 40 minutes or so. It went very quickly, which is a really good sign. So yeah, shall we come back at 5 to 8? So just 10 minutes for people. Short break, 10 minutes to do whatever people need to do, and then they can spend a little bit of time thinking about this, and then we can come back at 5 to 8. How does that sound like a plan?
That's good. Let's do that.
Okay, so it's 1946. If we come back at 1956, so we'll pick up the webinar again in 10 minutes. But as Lars says, spend a bit of time reflecting, making notes, anything that you want to do in those 10 minutes. Okay, see you shortly. Okay, so we can pick up again and carry on. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of time to reflect on your own situation, your own club that you're involved with. Lars, I think there is one question in the chat, but I think there's probably a natural time, maybe at the end, to take that question because we're only a couple of slides away. What do you think?
Yeah, let's. I just have one more slide, and then we can go to the questions. Yeah,
Excellent.
that's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we'll just continue. I have brought this slide that's a little bit more, you could say, a helicopter view of how we look at talents in Danish badminton. And as I said before, that's we look at the long-term potential. We are not so interested in who becomes the Danish champion in every age group, because normally it's a Dane. And what we're interested in is to see who of our talents, who of our players have the potential to beat the Chinese, the Indians, the Indonesians when they grow up. When we select the players for camps, for tournaments, we have no objective measures. It's we don't make a running test and select them or anything like that. We try to look at their technical ability. We look a lot at their mobility. Traditionally, the Danish players are not the best movers in the world, so we try to have a focus on that, and that's some of the things that are very hard to acquire later on in your career if you're not moving well from a young age. And then I said technical ability, and more than looking at how many shots they can do, how nice their game is, then we're actually looking a lot at the basic skills, the quality of the basic skills, like do you rotate the body in a good way? Do you have a good starting position with your elbow when you start your shot? That's more important than actually how many different specific shots you can do, because if you have quality in the basic skills, then you can build on that. You can improve from that during your career and learn the different other shots. If you have a bad quality in your basic skills, then it's very hard to change later in your career, and that can or will probably become a problem. And then we also look at the relative age, and you should also do that in the clubs, that it's in an age group, it's very important, or it makes a difference if you're born in January or you're born in December. Because even though they're playing the same class, then the January-born child is almost 1 year older than the December-born child. And the environment is not so important here, but it's if we have players from two different clubs, and one is one of the best talent clubs, and the child has played there all his or her life, and we are comparing to a player from a smaller club who hasn't had the same possibilities, then we believe there's a bigger potential in that player. And then it's very important, because we don't have any objective measures, then it's very important we have experienced coaches who can, and we make a lot of mistakes also, the experienced coaches, in who we pick. It's impossible to say when they are juniors, to say who will become the best senior players. But we are making our best guesses from the other points that are here. And then we have a way of talking about this is what we call the bucket model. In the old days, a bucket was made out of wooden sticks, and if one of the sticks were very short, then the bucket couldn't hold a lot of water. And in the analogy of a badminton player, a short stick is something that can ruin your career is a thing that you're not very good at, and so if you cannot move well, then you cannot play badminton at world class level. If your body can't tolerate a lot of training and a lot of intensity, if you get injured all the time, then you cannot become a world class badminton player. Also, and that's where the water analogy doesn't work any longer, but we're also looking at long sticks. There has to be something that can become a world-class asset in the player. That could be your attack, that could be your condition, that could be your movement, your tactics, whatever. But you have to have at least one thing that is world-class. That is the thing that all the opponents are looking at and trying to avoid, will be the decisive factor in when they're looking at preparing for a match, when they are watching video of your games. In Denmark, we have a lot of good players, all round good players, but if they don't have these long sticks, something that we think this can become a world-class competence, then it's hard to believe that they can make it all the way. So this is just to give you a little bit of insight into how we are looking at talent, and also now we're not selecting your players, but this is what we do to try to explain also to the players we don't select why we don't select them. I hope that that makes sense as well. Otherwise, you're welcome to ask questions to this slide as well. And speaking of questions, then that's where we are now. This was what I have prepared for you tonight, and I hope you have some interesting questions that we can finish off with here.
Good. Thank you very much, Lars. Very, very good. Nice to have loads of reflections from yourself about your experiences in Denmark. There's a lot we can take from that. Obviously, the context we work in over here is slightly different, but there's still loads of key learning for us. And I think this is a really important part of the webinar now, where everybody gets a chance to ask as many questions as they feel comfortable. I think we can start with the one that's in the chat. And then if anybody wants to not use the chat to ask a question, then literally just say in the chat you want to ask a question. And I think I can unmute you. I don't think you can unmute yourself. I just wanted to make sure there was no disturbances as Lars was presenting. So it's really up to you whether you want to ask a question through the chat or ask my permission, and I can turn your mic on. So let's start with the question that's there then. That seems like the obvious place to start. So from Thomas, he's asking, what does Denmark do for funding? Are there any best practices that you follow there?
Yeah, that is a good question. And the clubs are doing different things. Some clubs have a rich uncle, a sponsor that's giving some money and not getting rewards for that in you could say or they are paying more that they actually should, because they feel that the club is doing good for the community or whatever. We also have support from the local communities that we get funding for all the members we have younger than 25 from the local communities. Somewhere we also get support for renting the hall, so it's not that expensive. But mostly it is trying to find sponsors in one way or the other. It can be sponsors who just have boards in the hall or have their print on the shirts, but it can also be activities, different activities to try to raise money. before we also when there were still phone books that had to be delivered around in the local community, then some clubs were doing that and trying to earn some money from that. So it's all different ways or sources of trying to get the funding, and I hope there are some of them you can use in Ireland as well, and otherwise you have to be creative. But I think the important take-home message from this part is make sure that the persons who are in charge of the funding of the club, they are persons who know what they're doing, because it's much easier for them than it is for someone like me who's not very into to the money thing. Yeah.
Good. I was just seeing what questions are coming in. I think Thomas is he's very keen tonight, so he's asking the second one. How do you emphasize how do you emphasis on warm-ups? It's important to remain injury-free in badminton. So yeah, how do you emphasize the warm-ups?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we all know, all the grown-ups, we know that warm-up is very important. It's important mentally, and it's especially important physically. But my experience is also that even though we tell them a lot of times, then the kids, they are not very keen on this. So actually, we try to fool them a little bit, to manipulate a little bit. So we make a lot of the warm-ups into games, and also like the footwork, as I explained earlier, that if we can try to fool the children into thinking that we're doing something else. Now we're playing a funny game, and then they will get warm from that. And then as they grow up and they become more aware, and they also more focused on their own performance, they want to do good in training, or they want to do well in a match. But then they will take up, as they mature, they will take up the responsibility to do their own warm-up and do it well. But it's very individual when this maturity appears. If we do a basic, I would also say boring warm-up every time they come for practice, when from they are starting and until they reach world class, then I think they'll get bored, and then they will probably quit badminton along the way. So try to be imaginative, try to do it in different ways, and try to do it without calling it warm up. So they might not realize that that's what we're doing. But as a coach, you have to make sure that the players are warm enough to do the exercises you have prepared.
Thanks, Lars. There's a couple of people typing away. Yeah, okay. So Iskander, he's our national singles coach here in Ireland. So Iskander, I'll read this out, but you're welcome to. I can unmute you if you want, and we can have a discussion. But I'll read this out for now. So yeah, Iskander is originally from Malaysia, now coaching in the Ireland national team. I hope you remember me. My question is, what do you need to do if the coach not good in play, but have coach education? So, I think what Iskander is saying is if the coach is not necessarily a good level of player, but they are educated as a coach. So how does Denmark, how do the Danish clubs manage that?
But yeah, hi Iskander, I remember you. I remember I've coached against you some years ago. So nice to see you here in a different environment. In my opinion, there are two categories of coaches. There are former player coaches, and then there are what I call school teacher coaches. And I read that's also what you are talking about here. And I think we need both. in the Danish national team, we have actually made a handshake on that in the team there should be both kinds of coaches, because there are advantages in both backgrounds. Of course, it's a big advantage to have been a former top player. You have all the experiences, but also you haven't had the time to use most of your life doing a lot of coaching, thinking about coaching, educating yourself. I have played badminton at a decent level, but I've spent more time coaching than playing badminton. And then if you don't have the technique to show the shots, for instance, or show the exercises, then nowadays you're very lucky because you can find anything on the internet. So then bring an iPad, or if you have a screen in the hall, show the techniques from coaching education websites or from top level badminton. So it's I think you have a lot of tools today that can be used, which is a big advantage compared to 2 years ago. So and I'll encourage everyone to become a coach if they have that dream, because it's not impossible, even though you haven't played at all. Some of the Danish coaches, they have never played, actually. They are just interested. We have one of the most successful handball coaches. He can't even play handball. So there are advantages from having played the level you have, but it's also possible to do in different ways. Yeah. And then I think when we talk about coaching, it's very good to take education, but it's also good and maybe even better to do mentoring, or to have to do coaching with other coaches and discuss badminton. So try to make sure that you are in the hall with other good coaches, maybe every week or at camps, or to get inspiration and to inspire others. That's how I've learned most of what I can do. That's from other coaches and from making experiments myself with the players. Yeah.
Thanks, Lars. Good answer there. Really interesting. Hopefully that answered the question, Iskander. We've got a question coming in here from Sarah, is typing away. But I'll ask the question here, Lars, just while we're waiting. So you've obviously come across a lot of coaches yourself. What would you say makes a great coach, and why? Or is there a particular person that you see as being a really great coach, and that person doesn't necessarily have to be working with elite players? That coach could be a club coach. What makes that person a really great coach in that environment?
I think the most important thing is that you are true to who you are, that you're genuine and you're honest. And then I haven't come across the perfect coach yet. We all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, we have things that we are focused on, that we notice, and we have things that we don't pay so much attention to. So I think that being genuine, be true to who you are, and then of course also know that nobody knows everything, and you're never finished learning as a coach. I think that's what makes the best coaches, and there's no fixed way or of how to do it. And you have every day when you come in the hall, it's a new task. Every time you go to a new player, it's a different person, and you have to have a different approach. And even the same player in 2 different days, you could need different approaches. So you have to be open to this and try to look for ways forward, for ways of improving together with the players. And then there are some things are more important when you are coaching the youngest players, and other things are more important when you coach different types of players. But it's the honesty, yeah, being true to yourself is the most important thing, I think. You will, if you try to pretend to be someone or something that you're not, the players, they will call you a bluff at some point. So there's no point in doing that, and there's no point in trying to pretend that you know everything, because nobody knows everything about badminton.
Great, thanks, Lars. So your answer there was a lot around the qualities of a coach. You didn't really mention in there around like badminton knowledge as such, or maybe some of the skills. It was around the person behind the coach and around the qualities of that person, and being humble enough to know that they don't know it all, and being true to that. So I think that was a really strong message, because that's the sort of thing you don't learn that on a coach education course, or at least you don't learn that when you go through our coach education courses. So yeah, being yourself and being authentic to yourself was what I was hearing there. Okay, Sarah's come in here, says she's had the pleasure of meeting you in Denmark a few weeks ago and spent time in Verlus Club. I have a couple of questions. Number one, sustainability. I'll be very keen to get more details on how your funding streams are structured for your national policy. Are these government schemes available to all clubs? So there's a three-part question here, Lars. The second one, is there particular funding or scholarships available if you spot talent in a school or a community and the child cannot afford the fees? And number three, what are the typical fees for a child to join a club and the annual cost on the parents? So there's a lot to unpack there. I'll just let you take it away and answer away.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't go through the political structures of the local communities in Denmark. Then we will stay here all night. But there are different ways of where the clubs get help from the local community. But thing is that you have to pay to play badminton. But I don't know what the fees are in Ireland, but I would imagine that it's relatively cheap to play badminton in Denmark, to become a member of the club. Then if you are talent, you have more trainings than the other players, then you have to pay extra for that. And what is very expensive is going to all the tournaments. Even though Denmark is a small country, then you have, as a parent, you have to pay quite a lot to join the tournament system all through the year. And I think that is a disadvantage in our system, because you don't have to be very wealthy, but you have to be at least middle class in order to be able to afford to do that, to join it. And you have to have parents who are supporting you, not only with money, but also with their time and their interest. And we don't have funding or scholarships, and we don't have talent schools. What we have is different options. Like if you're in the last part of grammar school, what we call 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, you can go to, in some areas of Denmark, you can go to a sports school where you have some trainings in the morning, normally 2 morning training sessions, which is within your weekly schedule, and that's normally you're in a class with players from other sports, and then they have the 2 mornings off for training. And then in some schools it's physical training, basic physical training, and in other schools it's badminton training. So that's the options. And then when you go to high school, instead of doing it 3 years, which is the normal time, then you can have a 4-year school period where you have a little bit less classes each year, and you have more time for practice and for tournaments, and you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of if you have to go to tournaments or to camps. and you could get some private teaching if you're away a lot. So that are the options, but in short, it's quite expensive to be a talented badminton player in Denmark. And there we are a little bit in the middle. There are other sports which are much more expensive, and then there are also some sports which are cheaper to play. But I think in most sports nowadays, because of all the camps and the traveling, the parents, they have to invest some money to have a talented child, unfortunately.
Thanks, Lars. Yes.
Yeah, and then the last, what's the typical fee? Yeah, I think for a talented child, you would pay maybe around 500 euro a year to join the club, to have the trainings. But then there's all the traveling, which is much more. But it's not so expensive to join a club and play badminton. And that goes for all the sports clubs in Denmark, because it's the government, they support especially the children and youngsters in doing sports. So the threshold for doing sports in a club is quite low. But then if you want to do it at a talent level, then it is expensive. I hope that that answers most of your questions, Sarah. Otherwise, you're welcome to write me if you want more detail. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Lars. I think Sarah's probably typing a thank you again, I'd imagine. Yeah. Okay. Lars, yeah, I've got another question around culture. It's probably not necessarily one that you maybe touched on, although you did in a very subtle way when you talked about you wanting to create independent players. And you gave an example around them packing their bag. How much do you think the culture of Danish people has helped the sporting success in a discipline like badminton? Yeah, how important has the culture been, I suppose, and what is that culture? How will you describe it? And then the second part of the question, I suppose, is when you've worked in other countries, where you felt that the cultures may be different or maybe not as maybe suitable for like elite sport. Have you tried to change maybe culture when you've gone into an environment? So it's a little bit about the Danish culture and how that might lend itself to developing elite badminton players, and then a little bit around your experiences going into different cultures, and if you felt like it is maybe not conducive to developing world-class badminton players, have you tried to change that culture? Yeah, that's probably.
Yeah, very good question, Tom. It's I think what I said about producing independent players goes well along with our general perception of individuals, of children, of trying to raise them to become independent individuals. And we are a very democratic country, so everybody's opinion counts, and it's very hard to have just tell everybody what they should do, and then they abide and they do it. That's not the way we do it here, and we get lots of questions from the players. Why should we do this today? I think it's better to do it that way, and that can be very annoying. Sometimes it would be nice if you just tell them what to do and then they do it, and then we can move on. But we believe in that it's actually a strength, because when you're playing badminton, it's not like a FIFA game. We don't have the control pad and can choose every shot for them. They have to take very hard decisions, actually, on court during the rally in a very high speed and under a lot of stress. So it's very important that they learn how to make these decisions themselves. and also learn that it's you as I said, no coach knows everything. Also, you can't make the right decisions all the time. You will make lots of wrong decisions in a match. You will make mistakes. So it's they have to get used to that, and to learn how to cope with all the stress. And then also I believe that I touched a little bit upon that as well, but in training, if you're training, maybe I can see as a coach that the right thing or the best thing to improve right now is a player's backhand. But if the player feels that it's the slice from the forehand or it's the spinning net drop, and they really don't think that the backhand is a problem, then we will improve together, or the player will improve much more from training one of the two topics that he or she has chosen or thinks are very important. So we will have the players have a lot of say in what should they focus on. And sometimes we also let them choose the exercises themselves. We sometimes say that today we are practicing defense, and we start with this exercise, maybe a simple one, but then you can develop it with maybe it's 2 versus 1, and then you instruct your feeders in how do you want to make it more difficult. And then some of the players, they will stay with the first exercise, with the basic exercise, and others, they will progress to something more difficult. And then we give them feedback and say, okay, but is this maybe too difficult? That happens for a lot of the boys. They think they are world champions straight away. Or are there other ways that you could expand on the first exercise? So we try to invite the players to take responsibility for parts of the training, and then the older they get, the more responsibility, of course, they can take. And then there are some players who are talents in this area, and they will improve a lot and learn a lot and be able to almost be their own coaches. And there are other players who are never learning it, that they will improve a little bit, but they would never be able to take charge of everything. So that's a talent like everything else. So yeah. So I think the question about culture, and then when I go abroad as a coach, one thing I hate is that um, the country I visit, the players, the coaches, they think that I'm God. They think that I know everything about badminton, and they just want simple answers, and then they can copy and do very well. And that's not the way it is, because it's always a new situation you are stepping into as a coach. So you have to be ready to adjust. You have to see who is it that's playing in front of me. How should I intervene with these players, and what can I do best to try to help them to improve. And in some countries, you are more used to do as the teacher or the coach are telling you, and not asking questions. And that's also very hard, because in my opinion, you can get to a certain level just by doing what you're told, but it's very hard to become world class if you're not making decisions, reflections yourself. And I think a country like China, they have also realized this, that some of the players who have been most successful for them, but they are also players who are causing the federation and the coaches a little more trouble than the other ones. But the ones who are asking questions, the ones who have their own opinion, they're also the ones who are winning the most. That was a long question, I hope, or a long answer, and I hope you got your question answered. Yeah.
Yeah, it was good, Lars. I think sometimes, yeah, we kind of label a player as a troublemaker, but actually, sometimes those ones are the ones that will go the furthest. And it's not to say that we don't have to manage like bad behavior, but if they're certainly challenging you and asking you a lot of questions about why they're doing what they're doing, and wanting more and demanding more from you, then that can be a really positive thing. Just looking at the chat, there's no more questions in here. This webinar is scheduled till 9, but we're by no means going to go on till 9, but we can definitely go on for another 10 minutes or so. So I reckon if we call it a day at 8:40, I think that will probably do us. Yeah, unless anybody else has got another question, I'm just going to fire away with one, and then we'll probably take one more after my question. So, Lars, this is potentially a bit of a loaded question, and potentially a really difficult one to answer, but I quite like asking it. So, in Ireland, like many other European countries, we struggle for court time. We don't have necessarily the luxury, I would say, in Denmark, where a lot of the clubs, if not all the clubs, own their own facilities. So the club actually own the sports hall that they're training. In Ireland, we have a problem that we have so many different sports activities, and trying to get enough court time can be a real challenge. So a lot of clubs will maybe only operate for 1-2 hours a week. Some clubs might have 2 nights training. Probably not many clubs will have 3 nights of training. When I've been to Denmark many times, visited many clubs, one of the things that really fascinates me when I go to that environment is seeing the children walking from school to the local club, and they spend a lot of time sliding around in their socks, messing about and playing a lot of like free badminton and with no kind of adult supervision. You could describe it a little bit like being in a skate park, where you're experimenting, trying things. So if you had to come down to it and answer the question around what you would do if in 1 hour or 2 hours a week, between that unstructured informal play of letting the children just play and experiment, and it doesn't mean they're messing about, but they're certainly playing a lot of games-based type activity, or they have this structured training practice where it's very regimented, very organized, the coach is giving a lot of instructions, a lot of feedback. If you had to choose and put yourself on the and not sit on the fence, which one would it be, and kind of why?
Yeah, and my answer is it is a difficult question, and my answer will probably be something in between. But if your court time is that limited to only 2 times a week, then I think you need to use those 2 times for structured practice. But within the structured practice, you can have elements of these games, and you could say, now, today you do the warm-up yourselves. Just make sure that you're warm in 10 minutes or in 15 minutes or whatever. And then some of them the polite girls, they will start running and do normal exercises, and the naughty boys, they will start playing matches. But they will probably all be warm after 10 minutes. But also they can't keep the concentration for a full hour, so what we do is also that we put in some small games in the middle of the practice. So if we've done some technical skills, then we make a game of quarter court, box game, or net game, or something completely different outside the courts, whatever. Just something to make them change their focus and just relax in their minds, and then maybe they can focus on doing some more basic badminton skills afterwards. So I would implement it within the structured training, and also these elements of giving the players time in the training where they are in charge of what they're practicing. So for all, maybe not the youngest, but for good junior players and adults, I like to make this exercise where I say you are 2v1, and you decide the focus and you instruct the feeders yourself. So you are in charge of what you want to do. Maybe I've made the time intervals and I've made the setup that you are 2v1. And then you the rest you are in charge of yourself. And that works very well, because then the players are training what is most important to them. They're training with their heart in those exercises. And then, as I said before, maybe it's not what I thought was the most important for them, but at least they are doing the thing they focus on very well, because they believe that that's the most important thing today.
Great, thank you. I knew it would be a difficult one to answer. We don't necessarily have that situation where players can have that informal play before the structured training starts, because there'll always be other activities, whether it's aerobics or football or something in the hall. But like you said, I think there's probably a way of trying to blend the two kind of concepts together. So I don't think there's any more questions coming in here, Lars. So I think we can wrap up. Just want to say a massive thank you for joining us tonight, all the way from Denmark. I think it's been really interesting to hear a lot about what's been happening in Denmark over a number of years. Lots of similarities actually to our club structures here, but then also some differences, which some things I think we, as the clubs over here, can take away and implement quite quickly, and other things which are going to take a longer time. So it's been really good learning and reflection. Lots of great feedback in the chat, which is fantastic. So yeah, once again, just want to say thank you, Lars, for giving up your time. So just to conclude the last couple of minutes here, our next coaching webinar is on the 4th of December. It's with Katie Hall. She is going to deliver a session around para badminton coaching. So it's the 4th of December. It's a Wednesday again. It starts at 7 o'clock. You can sign up through Sport80 as normal. Hopefully see as many of you there as possible. That will conclude our webinar series for 2024. And for those of you that are in the WhatsApp community of practice, you will know that I've been asking questions around content for next year, but also around the format. This particular webinar has been quite interactive, a lot of questions and discussion. And I see next year being a mixture of webinars, a little bit like this, but maybe some workshop type style where the presenter can get people into breakout rooms and we can get you talking live a little bit more on the call, and working in groups and getting to know each other a little bit as well. So that's what's ahead of us. But for now, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And like I say, hope to see you on the 4th of December, if not in the new year. Great, Lars, thank you. I will speak to you again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.